Hello everyone, welcome to Imagine Science Films. I'm Nona Griffin, and today on our Experimenta series we're featuring Fieldwork World Cup, which is going to be a series of discussions with scientists around the country and the world who will be speaking to different topics about the World Cup, whether it's the science, the technology, competition of genetics, to the state-of-the-art technology of the stadiums. And today, we have the honor of speaking with neuroscientist Dr. Hatsopoulos, and he's going to be telling us a little bit about how the mind translates to motion and kind of this interface with new technologies. He currently is a professor at University of Chicago and the chairman of the Computational Neuroscience graduate program. He's in the past been at Brown and studied with John Donahue. And today he's going to be talking to us a little bit about topics relating to the World Cup, such as the exoskeleton that's actually going to be performing the first kickoff of the games today. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your research to get us started?
Sure. So I've been working for the past probably close to 20 years on, among other things, looking at how the motor parts of the brain, particularly the motor cortex, which is one part of the brain in the cerebral cortex, which is the part that's really well developed in human beings, that one particular area it's important for voluntary control of movement. And I want to understand how that area controls your arms and your hands for doing everything from simple things like reaching for a cup of coffee to playing a sport like soccer or playing a musical instrument. And so that's been my interest in the past 20 years.
Could you give us just a brief overview of what that process looks like? I mean, how do we have a thought to, kick a ball, and is that translated into motion?
Yes, right. So if you take that example, I mean, that thought gets created somehow, and that's a bit of a mystery, that initial thought to kick a soccer ball. And it's probably first is initiated somewhere not in the motor areas of the brain, somewhere else, what's called maybe the prefrontal cortex, it's another part of the brain. Somewhere it's being created, and then that thought has to be then translated into a number of decisions have to be made. For example, you have to decide, first of all, which leg you're going to use to kick the ball, right? I mean, you could kick it with your left leg or your right leg. And the fact that you have to use a leg and not your arm and not your head. Obviously, you can't use your hands in soccer, so that has to be prevented. You have to choose between your head and your legs, and then which leg do you choose? These are choices and decisions that have to be made somewhere in the brain. And then ultimately, once that decision is made, okay, I'm going to use my right leg, then commands get sent to a particular part of the motor cortex that controls the right leg. There is a specialized area for that.
Wow.
And that's been known for many years. And then once that's decided and that part of the brain is activated, it has to be activated in a certain way to create a coordinated kicking motion. You can't just flail your leg forward or backwards. You have to make a particular coordinated movement involving multiple joints. So you've got your hip joint and your knee joint, your ankle joint. And so that coordination, we believe, is probably taking place in that specialized motor area. The specific pattern of activity is setting up that coordination. And then some of that is being done there. Some of it might be done in the lower parts of the nervous system, but some of it is being done right there. And then signals from there travel down through connections that go down into the spinal cord, which ultimately activate neurons that are directly connected to muscles. And then those neurons activate, those in turn activate the muscles and generate the movement.
So can you describe a little bit the interface between that last part that you were mentioning in terms of the neurons actually interacting with the muscles and how they then spark movement?
Right. So there are basically wires, or equivalent to wires. I mean, they're called axons, but they're connections from the higher levels of this motor area that travel down. There are about 1 million of these connections on each side of your body, and they travel down the length of the spinal cord till they make connections with these specialized motor neurons, they're called, that actually activate the muscles. And yeah.
It's so interesting because already in describing this, I hear you using words such as motor and wires. I mean,
Yeah.
On some level, biologically, we've come up with this metaphor of machine and neurotechnology. Do you want to talk a little bit about the company that you started in 2001, Cyberkinetics Neurotechnology Systems, and what research ended up coming out of there?
Sure. So we had done, together with my advisor, John Donahue at Brown, we had been working with monkeys for several years and showed that they could control, actually, it was very exciting to see monkeys controlling computer cursors, a cursor on a computer screen with their brains.
That's
so you
amazing.
might say, well, how do you possibly do that? So what we first did with these monkeys is we trained them to use their arms to move a joystick to move a cursor. Just like your kids might be using, kids use video games, they use joysticks to move things on a computer screen. Well, we train our monkeys to do that, and we use standard training methods such as giving them reward, giving them juice, apple juice, for doing correct behaviors. So we train them to do that, and that takes a long time because obviously these are monkeys that don't speak English, and we have to communicate that to them. And once they've learned to do that with their arms, we then instead of we implanted a chip that can record from large electrical signals from large groups of neurons in that motor area that I talked about before. Mm-hmm. But now it's the area not involved in controlling the foot, but controlling the arm and the hand.
Wow.
So we put this chip in there, and we can now record electrical signals, and we can watch these signals activate as the monkey moves his arm, and we can then understand and build basically a decoder that decodes these patterns of activity when he moves his arm and decodes those into the actual movement of the arm. So a particular pattern might signify make a movement of your arm to the left, and another pattern might say move your arm to the right. Once we've built that decoder, then we can say, okay, now we tell the monkey, or we give to the monkey, the ability to control the cursor directly from his brain. So how does that work? So we built the decoder, we record the brain signals that are emitted when he wants to make a movement. Mm-hmm. And those signals get sent through the decoder, and the output of the decoder controls the motion of the cursor.
Wow.
So the cursor now is not being controlled by the arm, but by the brain.
Wow, that's incredible. So what type of application would that research have, or is that just a precursor for other research?
Well, that has a lot of interesting scientific implications, but that then led to this company that we started, and we had shown that it was a safe implant to put in the brain, and we also showed that it was effective. That is, it could be used to control a device. And then we used this data to get an FDA, what's called an investigational device exemption, basically approval from the Federal Drug Administration to implant this in human beings. And we implanted it in 4 human beings that had severe motor disabilities. 2 of them had spinal cord injury that left them completely paralyzed from the neck down. 1 of them had ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease, sometimes referred to. It's a motor neuron disease that basically makes you paralyzed. And then finally, a 4th patient that had a severe stroke in the brain that left her paralyzed. And we implanted this chip in that special area of the motor area of the cortex that I talked about that controls the arm in these patients. And then we told these patients, and this was what's exciting with humans, is we can talk to them, and we could ask them, okay, now think about making a movement of your arm or your hand. Now, they couldn't actually move their arm or hand because they were paralyzed, but they can still activate that part of the brain.
Wow.
And that's actually pretty interesting that you can do that, even though they had been paralyzed years before that, but they could still think about making movements, and they could still activate that part of the brain. So that part of the brain wasn't dead. It was still functional. The problem was that that part of the brain wasn't the signals from there were not being sent down to the muscles.
Is that the same part of the brain that's activated then with phantom limbs? It's that same idea of, you might have motion impairment, but in terms of being able to still think and have that desire to move, that still exists.
Yes, yeah. Are you talking about phantom limb pain or phantom limb, just the sense that you have a limb?
Just the sensation.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think people with amputations do feel that they're kind of surprised they don't have the limb anymore. So yeah, it's the idea that you can still think about moving, and so then we showed that in these 4 patients that they could control a computer cursor voluntarily with brain activity from that part of the motor cortex to make movements to basically surf the web, check their emails, and so forth.
Wow. That's incredible. So is that chip still implanted in these patients, or did it need to be?
No, well, actually, it is implanted in 1 patient, but generally this was a 1-year clinical trial, so it was moved after 1 year. But no, we do have one that's going on for many more years than 1. I think it's at least 5 years, more than that. So yeah, I mean, so that's ultimately, even though we were not successful in creating a business, because for a number of reasons, we showed proof of principle that this technology could be used to help patients with severe disabilities.
Right. So something similar, or at least related, would be the exoskeleton being used for the first kickoff. It's not quite the same idea, but it's directing a machine that's attached to the body to create this motion. Do you want to talk a little bit about that in comparison to the example that you just gave?
Yeah, so an exoskeleton is like a wearable robot. It's like, so you can slip your limb into this robot, and the robot itself will move your limb in a certain way. And that's something that's been developed for many years now. There are exoskeletons for the legs, for the arms, for the hands, including the fingers. I mean, an example that many people may have seen is, in Hollywood is like Iron Man. That's
Yeah.
like the ultimate exoskeleton. Now, we're not talking about anything like that, really. That's very kind of science fiction-y, but that's the same idea. Basically, you're wearing a robot. And so the idea with this World Cup demonstration is that a patient who cannot move his leg will be wearing an exoskeleton on his leg. And like I said, that's been done for years now. I mean, what's new here is that the exoskeleton will be controlled from the brain.
Wow, that's incredible.
So it's the same idea as these patients I talked about with our company. Now the difference is that they're going to be, as far as I understand it, they're going to be reporting signals from outside the brain on the scalp. The chip we put in was inside the brain.
Right.
These signals they're picking up are from outside the brain. You can still pick up signals. They're weaker, but you can still pick up signals from outside the brain and use those to control the exoskeleton. And that's it's an interesting approach to take for paralysis. It's something we've been working on in my lab. We've had arm exoskeletons that we've used in our monkeys. So the monkey's wearing an arm exoskeleton, and that's moving their arms around with brain signals.
Right.
And now it's an interesting approach for a number of reasons, but one thing that we're very excited about is the fact that by moving the limb itself, the exoskeleton is moving the limb. In many cases, you can, with these patients, they can still feel their limbs to some degree. They can feel how they are moving. And so the idea would be that by moving the native limb with these brain signals, they will be feeling the motion, and that will actually help them control the limb and the exoskeleton more effectively.
Right.
Because it's a kind of sensation called proprioception. It's the sense of our limb in space, where it is in space, and how it's moving. It's a sense that you don't really learn about in high school. You learn about the primary senses, hearing, touch, seeing, and so forth, smelling. But this is a sensation that's really critical for normal motor behavior. And in our patients that were controlling a cursor, they did not feel anything. They did not feel any the motion of the cursor. They just were controlling the motion of the cursor. With an exoskeleton, you might be able to feel to some degree the motion of your arm or your leg in the case of the player today or the person today. And so that sensation of motion might help you guide it better.
So in that process, is there any hope of rebuilding this connection of some kind? I mean, the combination of thinking about it and having that motion being executed while the possibility of feeling that motion. I mean, is there any hope to rebuild those networks?
Well, I don't. Yeah, I mean, there are attempts now to reconnect or to change the networks, to modify them. As far as fixing like a break, like in a spinal cord injury, I don't think that currently the technology is there to do that.
Right.
I mean, there is a whole other area of research that's not involving machines, more kind of biological research that tries to apply, pharmaceutical agents to try to regrow those connections. That has promise, but I'm not sure if this brain-machine approach is going to be the way to reconnect those.
I wonder if the combination of the pharmaceutical approach with some kind of enhancement in combination with this technology would make a difference in strengthening this connection.
Absolutely. I think that could be very exciting. A combination approach. Absolutely.
So I guess I'm pretty interested in your background as well. You started off in psychology, well, actually in physics and then psychology, and now you're kind of combining both in a way. Do you want to speak a little bit about your background? I know a lot of our audience are, possibly looking into different science careers and always interested in hearing the personal stories behind our scientists.
Sure. Well, I guess right up front, I should say that it's never too late to change, to make a change in your trajectory. So don't feel, if you feel unhappy with the direction you're going in, make a change. It's possible to do, and I'm an example of that. I've made multiple changes in my career. So I started in physics. My father was a physicist, and I was always interested in science, so it seemed like a natural thing to try. And I was interested in it, but at some point I realized I didn't want to continue in that field, and after college, and I started getting interested in psychology and things like abnormal psychology, like schizophrenia and depression and other things, and multiple personality disorder. I just got interested in it for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe my grandfather was a psychologist, and I got interested. And then after I finished college, I decided this is the direction I want to go in. And I worked for, I needed to get some research experience before applying to graduate school, and I worked for a mathematical psychologist. And he hired me because I had a mathematical background with my physics background. So, that's another take-home, another lesson that I learned, which is if you want to make these changes in direction of your career, use whatever skills you've acquired in your previous background to your advantage. And I used that to my advantage. So he hired me. He said, well, I'll teach you the psychology, but you have the math background to do it, to do what I need you to do. So it'll be much easier to do it that way than to teach you the math. So he hired me, and then I applied to graduate school in psychology, experimental psychology, I should say. It's not clinical psychology. And I went to college. I went to graduate school at Brown. And at around the same time, the field of artificial neural networks was very hot. The idea of building completely artificial systems that mimic networks of neurons, and that got me very excited. And so I said, well, why not study real neural networks? And that led me to neuroscience. And so then I got my degree in, actually I got my degree in cognitive science, which is sort of like psychology, but it also includes computer science. But I had never really done neuroscience. I'd never seen a real brain in my life. And so as a postdoctoral researcher, I switched fields again to neuroscience and started recording from the brain, nervous system. And so I made the second switch, and what I did was I was hired by a neuroscientist who to do my postdoc, who wanted me to do computer modeling of the nervous system, which I had been doing in graduate school. And then I asked him, will you teach me how to do neuroscience? Will you teach me how to stick electrodes in the brain to record? And he taught me. And so then I learned that, and I took that my background in modeling, used that to my advantage to get this opportunity to learn neuroscience, and that's how I got into it.
Wow. So do you think your interdisciplinary background in kind of all of the sciences have inspired your work today?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think I chose I probably chose motor control, like movement, because of my physics background. And that's helped me, I think, because I had some experience in robotics and just basic mechanics and from physics, so that helped me a lot. And my background in psychology has helped me a lot in terms of designing the right experiments to test specific hypotheses. I think that's where psychologists, the training as a psychologist really comes through, that the ability to design the right experiment. And of course, we're training monkeys to do tasks. That requires knowing psychology.
Yeah, I would imagine that being a challenge. So where do you hope these technologies are in, say, another 5 years?
Well, I think that we are close to, technologically, I think we have overcome almost all the obstacles to make this a viable technology to help real people who have severe motor disabilities, paralysis due to spinal cord injury, ALS, stroke, maybe even cerebral palsy, many different motor disorders. I think the one remaining technological, or the biggest technological challenge, is to develop an interface that is the chip, as I talked about before, that can record signals from the brain. We need a device that can be reliable, that can last for at least 10 years. Because if we're going to put in something in the brain, no patient is going to be willing to undergo multiple brain surgeries to implant this. If it fails and we have to replace it, they're not going to agree to having multiple surgeries. So we need something that's highly reliable. That's something that has still not been solved. But once that's solved, I think the other challenge is not technological. It's more of a financial challenge. It's going to take a lot of money, and my experience with this company was that investors want two things. They want something that will happen quickly, so they can get their money back and make money. And secondly, they want a market. They want to sell this, whatever is being developed, to a large audience, so you have a large market. And this technology can't really, at its current state, can't really address either problem. So the first is it will take a lot of time. It'll take time. It doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
It doesn't happen in a quarter. These financial people work on quarters, and it just, anything when you're working with biology, it'll take some time. And secondly, the market, that is the people that we're going to help, is relatively small. It's substantial, but it's, as far as investors are concerned, it's very small compared to other products that are viable for millions of people. Here we're talking about tens of thousands of people, and so that's a concern. So I think the solution will be either a non-profit organization or perhaps a partnership between a for-profit organization, a business, and the government. Mm-hmm. Some sort of partnership like that to help these people. For example, there's already interest from the military to help soldiers that have amputations, and to develop devices, prosthetic limbs that will be controlled with a brain. And they're putting a lot of money into it. So if the military could work together with private businesses to develop these systems and give them to soldiers, but also to the civilian population, that would be the way to go.
So what are your thoughts on debuting this technology, or a version of this technology, at the World Cup?
Well, I mean, I think I think overall it's a good thing because it will excite people about science, particularly young people, about what science can do and how it's just a really exciting. Science is really exciting, and I think we've lost a lot of that excitement. People want to go into other areas because they feel that science is no longer. It's just boring. It's actually not boring at all. It's really exciting, and it's very creative too. That's another thing. People think it's not a creative area. It's highly creative. You have to come up with your own ideas, and so this will showcase a technology that is being developed. It's a real technology. Granted, it's probably not ready for prime time. That is, it's not ready to be implanted, to be used in patients on a large scale. So, the only risk by doing something like this on the grand scale of the World Cup is that people might think it's ready to go. Right. And so they'll be maybe a little bit misled in thinking it's more mature than it is. Mm-hmm. It will still take some years before it's ready. But I think that risk is not as important as the advantages of basically showcasing this and exciting people.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you so much for being on our show today, Experimenta. It's been wonderful talking to you about these technologies and learning a little bit more about, how a thought can possibly be translated into motion, and then bringing technology into that. It's a really incredible field of research, and has a huge implication on the quality of life for patients. Do you have any last comments?
No, I don't. Thank you very much for having me on.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and everyone, please stay tuned for our next Experimenta. We'll be talking with more scientists in the next few weeks about more science-related topics to soccer during the time of the World Cup. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.